I do believe that there are things more important than money. That's not a popular point of view at the moment in our world, but my good name and the good name of the people who work here matters more to me than the last dollar. It always has, it always will.
Warburg Realty is the largest independent real estate broker in New York City. Founded in 1896, it's brokered many of New York's great houses and apartments. CEO Frederick Peters has led the company for 3 decades through the global financial crisis and the pandemic. A composer of classical music by training, with a deep love of aesthetics, new homes became Peters' canvas. Frederick Peters, pleasure to have you in NTD Business.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Frederick, we're about 18 months into the pandemic. You've, as a business leader, had to come through, and not just yourself making decisions for the company, but also guiding your staff and your team through as well. How have you done it?
I've always been somebody who depended very much on the creation and management of personal relationships. That has been at the core of my business philosophy. And so a great deal of our success in staying on our feet over the last 18 months has related to the degree to which we have tried to maintain a sense of Warburg Realty as a community, even during the times when we couldn't meet in person. We've made extensive use of Zoom. During the early months of the pandemic, we were meeting several times a week on Zoom with the agents. I was on the Zoom calls with the staff every week. I was trying to be as ubiquitous as I could be.
And how did you feel during it? Did you feel nervous, uncertain? Did you try and keep those concerns away from the staff?
Of course I felt nervous and uncertain, and of course I tried to keep those concerns away from my agents and from the staff. I, in fact, even had an agent say to me at a certain point, "This has been so hard for me and my family, but it doesn't seem like it's been that hard for you. You don't seem panicked or anxious at all." And I responded by saying, "Yeah, that's called leadership. You're not the one who has the luxury of acting frightened, no matter how you feel. Your job is to be able to represent the notion that things will be okay."
Is this something you feel you've had to cultivate through your professional life, say during the financial crisis, 2008 maybe?
Oh yeah. I've been through a few financial crises at this point. 2008, 2000, 1989. So yes, I've learned a couple of things. One thing I've learned, and then of course 9/11. One thing I've learned is that our business comes back. Even when it seems like the apocalypse, it isn't. There will be a turnaround. And so what you have to do is make the choices that enable you to get there.
Of course, a lot of these choices, they don't come during the crisis or during the panic. Obviously, you have to put certain things in place in order to structure business a certain way so that you can persevere through these. Is there a type of culture you instill in your people or your organizational staff?
That's an interesting question. I think they know they can look to me for confidence in the fact that we're going to get through it. And so far, I have been lucky enough to be able to provide that. In addition, I do well with quick reactions. I don't wait for the tidal wave to overwhelm us before trying to figure out what to do. I always act fast in critical situations, and even though that may get me some pushback, I think my staff also understands that I'm sharing whatever pain I impose on them, and that we really are. I do think the people who work here believe that we're all in it together.
How do you balance that, or how do you convey this to people, both this is something you may not want to hear, or this is something you may not want to do, but this is for the greater good? How have you learned to convey this to people?
I think actually on at least one of the calls, I used exactly those words. I said, you're not going to want to hear this, but this is what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to cut salaries by 25%. And believe me, I'm doing it for myself as well. And we're going to have to not spend money on the following advertising and marketing initiatives. And basically, there's just going to be a lot of stuff we put on hold until there's a marketplace again.
How has doing business changed in your time as a professional, either selling or from a technology perspective, or even from a cultural perspective? How has doing business changed?
I'm not sure for me the cultural piece has changed all that much. I and my compadres at the executive level here and on the staff too, our customer is the agent. The agent's customer are the buyers and sellers out there in the world. And so I think that whatever I model is likely to be the way my staff treats the agents, and hopefully also the way the agents treat the people they deal with. That I think a certain kind of behavior always has to come from the top. My mother used to say to me, jokingly, do as I say, not as I do. But that's not the way it works in life. People do what you do, not what you say. So I think I've always been, as I said earlier, very relationship oriented. And I think that really is at the core of what has made Warburg successful and what has kept our people with us. Invariably, you have some defections. That's just the world these days. But by and large, we've had a great retention success rate. As far as technology goes, technology is a facilitator. It's not an end in itself. I think my daughter, who is a technologist and far smarter than I, has always said, the problem with people who love technology is that they believe technology is the answer to every problem. Technology is not the answer to every problem. I would actually argue that cultivating good relationships with people is far more powerful than providing them with the most modern technology.
You've chosen to stay independent, one of the last remaining large independent brokers.
Last man standing.
The last man standing. Is there a particular reason? What are the advantages of staying independent?
That's a funny question. My immediate reaction is I hate having other people tell me what to do. But actually, it's largely been situational. I've really enjoyed running the company, and nobody has come along so far who made me think that being allied with them was going to make it better for my people. And when and if that person comes along, then I will be totally open to considering it. But until that time, I want to make sure that anything that happens to the company has to be a really good cultural fit, because I haven't devoted 30 years of my life to building this culture in order to see it vanish into some larger organization which doesn't believe in what I believe in.
What is that specifically?
First of all, integrity. I believe in the fact that you mean what you say and you say what you mean. And you're not just giving the answer you think people want to hear. I believe that it's more important to do the right thing than to close the deal. So if it's a question of walking away because doing it would require you to behave in a way which violates your essential moral principles, that of course is making the assumption that you have essential moral principles, which I fear is not always true in the world of business these days. I'd rather have the principles than the money. I would say that really is my core business philosophy. Treat people right, tell the truth, and remember, one of my brokers actually recently quoted back to me something I say all the time, which is, if you come into me and say you have a moral dilemma, you almost certainly already know what the right solution is. And you're coming into me to find out whether I'll give you permission to do the thing that you already know is probably wrong, but you also already know that I'm probably not going to give you permission to do it.
A lot of people might say the business is too cutthroat, is too tough. You got to make tough decisions. You got to promise big and then try and work it out. But from listening to you, you feel integrity. You have to mean what you say, and I believe only say something if you know you're going to actually carry it out. But how difficult or how advantageous maybe has this been for you in business?
You always have to make tough decisions no matter what you're doing. It's not just in real estate. You're doing that no matter what business you're in. Advantageous. It all depends on what you mean by advantageous. There are definitely times when it hasn't been financially advantageous, but I do believe that there are things more important than money. That's not a popular point of view at the moment in our world, but my good name and the good name of the people who work here matters more to me than the last dollar. It always has. It always will.
Do you feel people recognize you for this?
I think so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
And this, of course, has its own advantages. It's a long-term approach.
I think it does have its advantages, but the primary advantage is that I feel good about myself and what we're doing.
You didn't always necessarily want to be in real estate. At one point, you wanted to be a composer, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's true.
What role have the arts played in your development, either as a professional or just as a person in general?
It's other than my family and the business, it's the most important thing in the world to me. I'm an aesthete by nature. I was never a jock. I was always the guy who was going to look at the paintings in the museum or going to the opera. And those things are a core part of my identity. And I think the arts and humanism in general do have a big role in forming you as a moral person. I do think they're deeply involved in the historical evolution of morality in all of its different forms in cultures throughout history. And I think the more you understand about that and the more you see the way that played out in Chinese painting in the 14th century and in the Renaissance and in the philosophers of the Enlightenment in France and England, I think all of those things actually have an impact on forming you as a human being and determining what you believe to be important. I'm a big lover of that famous line about how those who are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it. But I also feel like a depth of knowledge, humanist education is profoundly important in creating a well-rounded and centered human being. I mourn, even though I understand it, the fact that most upper echelon education has become so expensive that you have to think of it as trade school unless you're unusually fortunate, because I just believe in the way broader, more humanistic education impacts you as a person. Doesn't necessarily get you an entry-level job at Goldman Sachs.
How did you educate yourself in this field?
Oh, I don't know. I started playing the piano when I was 10, and I started writing music when I was 13. And then I just was passionate. And after I graduated from college, I decided that I wanted to pursue music. And I went back to grad school and got a master's in music and did most of my work for a PhD before becoming a doctoral dropout. And at least a part of that was because I happened to be one of those guys who, I wouldn't say inadvertently, but perhaps surprisingly, became a parent at the age of 26. And suddenly the need to earn some money became paramount. And I had always been, I'm really a real estate agent because of my love for aesthetics. I fell in love with floor plans, the symmetry of them, the arrangement of space. It really was an aesthetic fascination. And that's really what led me to think that I could be a real estate agent part-time while I was finishing my doctorate. But then, as you can see, Paul, real estate ate my life.
You seem to lament the fact that somebody like yourself can't both pursue their passion for the arts or the humanities while at the same time making a living for themselves. Is there something that could be done to cultivate this space?
Well, I probably could have. You know, I think the other thing about me is that I'm a dyed-in-the-wool fifth-generation New Yorker. And if I had completed my doctorate and gone into academic life, which is what I fully anticipated doing, we would absolutely have had to leave town because there just weren't going to be opportunities here. Though this was the 70s and early 80s when PhDs all over New York were driving taxis. And I didn't want to be in that position, and I really didn't anticipate what would happen to me. It was accretive rather than something which I had laid out for myself in advance. I've learned in business to do this, but at that time in my life, I was not a long-term planner. But then I liked being an agent, and in fact, I liked it a lot. And one thing led to another, and I come from a family in which I'm one of many brothers. And what that means is that I'm extremely competitive. And so once I was doing the job, then I wanted to move ahead because I'm extremely competitive. And so I got a job as a manager, and then once I had a job as a manager, I wanted to move beyond that, and so here I am.
It was around, as you mentioned, the same time you became a father as well.
Yeah.
How has that experience of raising a family affected Frederick Peters, the CEO?
Being a parent changes everything about you. More than anything else, I would say it gives you a commitment to the future. Your level of interest in what happens is enormously increased by the fact that you now are deeply involved with these people who are going to be around long after you're gone. Now, of course, I'm a grandfather, and so I feel that even more acutely. So I would say that's one big thing that it affected me in terms of my business thinking, in that I just began to see a longer arc. It ceased being quite so one day at a time. And my life just looked different when I could see that there was this long period of child rearing, and then after that, this long period in which they and their families would go on long after I did. I think I felt that, as I said, even more acutely since I've been a grandfather, that I feel really connected to the flow of generations through time. It enables me to look back at what my grandparents and great-grandparents did and see how those influences have come down to me, and how hopefully I'm passing those influences on to my kids and them to their kids. And so I do think that also has a big impact on the degree to which you want your legacy to be a legacy of honor.
What do you feel most responsible for when you look at your grandkids? You know, what do you really want to pass on? What's most important to you?
I would really like them to love the arts. That really matters to me. And other than that, I want them to be kind and moral people. I don't think I really give a damn about that much beyond that. happy. I would like to think that they could be happy. Happiness is not necessarily a particularly easy thing to achieve in life, but we are all granted the pursuit of it in the Constitution, and I hope that their pursuit of it will be successful.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Frederick Peters, thank you.
Thank you so much.